I had hoped that over the period of the Christmas celebration that the news of the depraved would slow down and that I'd have little to report on when I returned to work. Boy, was I wrong. One of the stories that broke over the Christmas break that more Catholics should know about, but unsurprisingly don't, is the case of W. Thomas Foucher, the Catholic priest in Idaho who lived in a self-described world of Satanism and child pornography. I'm going to try to refrain from calling him father as much as possible, out of respect for the office of the Catholic priest, an office that I have a great deal of respect for. I mean, if there ever was an argument for the actions of someone vacating their office as a priest, worshiping Satan should probably do the trick. And yes, I know, once a priest, always a priest. But still, the point stands. Before we dive into the story itself, Foucher's case is not an isolated case in the slightest. I'll go over, in brief, some indications that Satanism in the clergy is not limited to this case. But first, the case of W. Thomas Foucher. Boise priest who lived in the world of Satanism and pornography, sentenced to 25 years in prison. As you'll hear, that seems a little light to me. Oh, and it does come with this warning. Some readers may find the details in the news story disturbing. The Reverend W. Thomas Foucher, a longtime priest in the Roman Catholic Diocese of Boise, who pleaded guilty to 5 felony crimes, has been sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole and will be required to register as a sex offender. That means he'll be able to be released to the general public at the tender age of 98 years old. Father Foucher, there I called him father, was trying not to, 73, was accused of amassing thousands of child porn images and videos on his home computer, and pleaded guilty in September to sharing some of those images online. He apologized in the courtroom ahead of his sentencing at the Ada County Courthouse in Boise on Thursday. This is the crime that has the potential for both immediate and long-lasting consequences, 4th District Court Judge Jason Scott said. I think there's a legitimate risk to the community. I am deeply sorry that I have been connected to that in any way, Foucher told the judge in a statement that lasted about 17 minutes. Foucher said he was deeply struck by the victim impact statements and that he knows child pornography is not a victimless crime. I was one really sick puppy. I screwed up big time. I feel so much remorse and anger, Foucher said at his sentencing. There are many people who will benefit if I am no longer in jail, Foucher said, explaining that he'd like to help others. There are no people who will benefit if I am in jail or in prison. Gonna disagree with the priest on that one. A thinner and more frail-looking Foucher was wheeled into the courtroom in his Ada County Jail uniform just before 9:30 a.m. At least 30 people, including some members of the Diocese of Boise, plus local media, were packed into the windowless 5th-floor courtroom. Some watching cried while others left the room as a local detective described in graphic detail the images and child pornography found in Foucher's possession. Diocesan officials told the Statesman Wednesday that they will seek to have Foucher defrocked. That means laicized. They reiterated that in a press release after the sentencing, quoting, "The volumes of shocking information that the law enforcement investigation uncovered reveal the heinous nature of child pornography and the tragic impact upon its victims," the release says. While we cannot begin to fathom what brought Foucher to the point that he was able to enter into this evil and dark world, we are thankful for the efforts of the law enforcement community in doing what it can to protect our children from these crimes. The prosecutor called Garden City police officer Detective John Broombaugh to the stand on Thursday. Broombaugh, who has been on the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force for 5 years, said he received a cyber tip that involved 2 images sent from WTFouch at AOL.com that was linked to the St. Mary's Catholic Church website. In the months that followed, Broombaugh said his investigation looked at chats and emails that showed Father was actively seeking interests with gay men, satanic interests, and the rape and killing of minors. I'm going to pause here and just let that one sink in. He also described the contents of the images police found on Foucher's cell phone, computer, and Dropbox account. More than 2,500 files that were sexually exploitive or pornographic with young-looking subjects. The files were described by police as violent, disturbing, and torturous, some involving children crying. In online chats with a person called Bruno, Foucher expressed a desire to have sex with boys, Brumbaugh said. Foucher said he had satanic desires, an attraction to 6-year-old boys, and that the thought of killing someone does begin to excite me, according to the detective. Brumbaugh also said Foucher's online conversations about shared child pornography include the Catholic priest talking about fantasies, including the sexual abuse of altar boys and babies, and saying that he liked a video of a boy being beaten to death. The volume of images was something I haven't come across, Brumbaugh said, and added that the extreme nature of the images took a toll on himself and others involved in the investigation. As Foucher solicited more videos of young boys, he wrote that he felt wonderful indifference, Brumbaugh told the courtroom. Attorney General Lawrence Wasden, whose office oversees the task force that investigated the crimes, said in a press release that the sentencing is a reminder of how challenging this work can be. Today's sentencing brings close to one of those most difficult cases the Idaho Internet Crimes Against Children Unit has ever investigated, Wasden said. As those in the courtroom today are now aware, the nature of the evidence uncovered was extremely disturbing. I want to publicly say thank you to the ICAC staff for their extraordinary professionalism and dedication to their mission in the face of inherently difficult work. And if you want to read the rest of that yourself, again, the link is on the source's blog, which is linked below. That's legitimately horrifying, to say the least. But by now you might be responding with, yeah, we know this has been going on, so what? Let's get some context by returning to the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which detailed some truly disturbing details about the alleged abuse of minors by priests. I say alleged because the surviving perpetrators haven't had their day in court yet, though most of them are already dead. Regardless, the details are supplied by a website called ydr.com. I'll show the article. I'd like to show the article on the screen like I did with the Idaho story, but YDR has a lot of ads, even more so than that Idaho story did, which makes that difficult to do. So I'll be just referencing the site. As usual, a link is on the source's blog in the description below. During the course of the grand jury investigation, investigators uncovered a ring of predatory priests within the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Again, this is from YDR. These priests shared intelligence, that's an interesting way of phrasing it, about victims, shared their victims among themselves, and produced child porn. The group included a George Zerwas, a Francis Pucci, a Robert Wolk, and a Richard Zula. They subjected their victims to the abuse of whips, violence, and particularly sadistic forms of rape. One victim, who investigators have dubbed George, was made to get up on a bed. As the priests watched, they asked George to remove his shirt. They drew images of Christ on the cross on his body. They asked George to remove his pants. The priests began taking Polaroid pictures of him, saying that these images would help them develop religious art for the parish, which caused them to giggle amongst themselves. George said the photos were added to a collection of similar photos depicting other teenage boys. George and other boys were given gold crosses to mark them to other predators who would pass the boys around to be abused. I mean, this was clearly an organized ring. But is it satanic in the sense of worship? Let's dive deeper. One of the marks of Satanism is the inversion of the sacred. We're all most familiar with the upside-down cross as a symbol of Satanism, despite the inverted cross actually being a symbol of St. Peter to honor his crucifixion in Rome. But for Satanists, they know that the vast majority of Christians will be disturbed by the inverted cross, and as such have co-opted the symbol. The typical Black Mass involves the Mass being celebrated in reverse, with the Eucharistic liturgy being celebrated, if we can call it that, near the start of the ceremony, always by an apostate Catholic priest. I'll spare you most of the details about that, and no, I don't have any first-hand experience with it, we'll quite literally thank the Lord, but I have read on the issue and have seen interviews with various exorcists who more or less say the same thing. The profanation of the sacred is a hallmark of Satanism, and in this way, the use of gold crosses to mark the prey of pedophilic predators is in keeping with that. But it gets worse because the Pennsylvania grand jury report details some truly horrific facts. I'll describe it here briefly in as cleaned up language as possible. The report states in no uncertain terms that the young boys, both children and teenagers, were penetrated with crucifixes by these heretical priests. In referencing the story of George, recall that he and other boys were told to pose in the nude in poses that mocked the crucifixion of the Lord. James Grine, in his testimony in court recently, as well as in his interview with Dr. Taylor Marshall, stated in no uncertain terms that McCarrick molested him in the confessional. But does this all indicate Satanism in the clergy? Again, recall the case of Father Alfred Coons, who I did a video on some months ago. He had been murdered brutally after it was reported that he had been investigating Satanism in the clergy and had been in the earliest stages of collaboration with Malachi Martin on a nonfiction book that would expose the Satanists in the church. It was reported later that a dead calf was found nearby, as were other ritual markers, but nothing in the official police report indicated this. But that's just speculation, right? I'll leave you with this story from 2011. Headline: Supreme Court rejects woman's lawsuit claiming satanic abuse by Toledo priest. Posted April 7th of 2011. The Ohio Supreme Court yesterday dismissed a woman's case against Toledo priest Gerald Robinson, in which she claimed the Catholic cleric sexually abused her in satanic rituals when she was a child. The Ohio Supreme Court yesterday dismissed a woman's case against Toledo priest Gerald Robinson, in which she claimed the Catholic cleric sexually abused her in satanic rituals when she was a child. The 6-0 decision, with Justice Judith Ann Lanzinger abstaining, follows a series of rulings in Lucas County Common Pleas Court and the Ohio 6th District Court of Appeals that ultimately determined the lawsuit was filed too late. The woman, who filed anonymously as Survivor Doe, said yesterday that she was taking the High Court's ruling in stride. "I'm disappointed in the way the law treats victims, but I'm not really upset that they turned it down. I'll get my day in court when I stand before God," she told The Blade. She said she was considering writing a book about her ordeal. Thomas Pletz, an attorney for the Toledo Diocese, said he was not surprised by yesterday's ruling, which the court issued without comment. The Supreme Court only reviews a small percentage of the cases that have already been thoroughly analyzed by the appellate courts below. Less than 10% of the cases in this category, he said. The civil suit was filed April 20th, 2005, less than a year after Robinson's arrest on charges that he murdered a nun in 1980. The priest, who turned 73 on April 14th, was convicted in May 2006 of murdering Sister Margaret Ann Paul and is serving a 15 years to life sentence at Hocking Correctional Facility in southern Ohio. Presumably, if he is still alive, that means he will be due for parole in 2020. Survivor Doe, now 47, claims she was abused starting in 1968. Interesting. And that her perpetrators had worn disguises and used fake names during these satanic rituals. She said she had repressed the traumatic memories for decades, but they began returning during therapy in the mid-1990s. Her lawsuit said it wasn't until she saw Robinson's evil eyes on television after his April 23, 2004 arrest on murder charges that Survivor Doe recognized the priest as one of the alleged perpetrators. Mark Davis, attorney for Survivor Doe, contended the statutes of limitations should not have begun ticking until she was able to name her abusers. Common Pleas Judge Ruth Ann Franks dismissed the suit in January 2007 on statutes of limitations grounds, but 9 months later the appeals court sent the case back to her. Judge Franks dismissed it a second time in January 2010, going into greater detail on Ohio statutes of limitation laws in her 27-page opinion. The judge said Ohio law required Survivor Doe to have used reasonable diligence to try to identify her abusers before the statutes expired. She said the woman could have contacted law enforcement officials or sued the 5 alleged abusers, whom she knew, her mother, her older brother, and 3 of her mother's adult male friends. Davis contended that his client was scared to death of her abusers, and it was feared that prevented her from contacting authorities. That's entirely reasonable if you understand the psychology of survivors of abuse. The Ohio 6th District Appeals Court in December 2010 upheld Judge Frank's ruling, saying it was not addressing whether Survivor Doe's allegations were true, only that the complaint was not filed in time. The courts never disputed the facts, Davis said yesterday. The evidence seemed overwhelming in her favor. It was just the concept of filing too late. Just because the court said she filed too late doesn't mean she wasn't harmed. Gerald Mazikowski, a retired Toledo public school teacher and a lay Catholic leader who was also named in Survivor Doe's suit, died March 2nd of 2010 of congestive heart failure at the age of 59. The lawsuit included descriptions of satanic abuse during Survivor Doe's childhood. She contended that Robinson, Mazikowski, and others wore nuns' outfits when they cut her with a knife as a sacrifice to Satan, drew an upside-down cross on her abdomen, and forced her to drink the blood of sacrificed animals, such as a rabbit. The lawsuit contended that Survivor Doe was raped, molested, and forced to perform sexual acts on the perpetrators during the satanic cult sessions, which she said took place in the basement of St. Adalbert Catholic Church until 1972, and later in an undisclosed wooded location. Want to read the rest of that yourself? I will have a link in the sources blog linked below. If you like videos like this, like and share this video and subscribe, and click the notification bell below. If you're interested in supporting my work, there are various options below, along with links to my Twitter, the Sources blog, and the Return to Tradition Facebook page. Thank you for listening. I'm Anthony Stein. Ave Maria.